January 1898. The Birdpur Estate in the Basti district of northern India. A British engineer named William Claxton Peppé stands at the bottom of a shaft 18 feet deep. In front of him is the lid of a stone box. It has not been opened in more than 2,000 years. Peppé was not an archaeologist. He was an Aberdeen-trained engineer who managed the Birdpur Estate for his family. On that estate stood a large earthen mound the villagers called a kote. It sat about 19 kilometers south of Lumbini, in the flat farmland near the Nepalese border. 2 years earlier, in 1896, an Ashokan pillar had been identified at Lumbini as the marker of the Buddha's birthplace. Everyone working in that district began looking at mounds differently. There was a second reason to dig. The famine of 1896 and 1897 had emptied the district. Peppé needed to put his tenant farmers on paid work. Clearing the mound gave hundreds of people wages through the worst of it. So in the spring of 1897, he began cutting a trench into the top. Under the earth, he found brick. Not rubble, but masonry, laid in concentric circles and set solid all the way through. Vincent Arthur Smith, a magistrate and Indologist in the Indian Civil Service, advised him to keep going down. Breaking through the core took weeks of labor with hand tools. At 10 feet, the diggers found a damaged soapstone casket. Around it lay scattered beads, crystals, small cut stars of gold. It was enough to prove the mound was a stupa, a Buddhist relic monument, and that someone had built it to hold something. Then, in January 1898, at 18 feet, they reached the Coffer. It was a single block of hard sandstone, weighing about 3/4 of a ton, 2.5 feet high, 2 feet wide, with a heavy sandstone lid cut to fit. Nothing about it was casual. Getting a stone of that weight to the center of a stupa and then building a brick dome over it was a deliberate act of engineering. Inside were 5 vessels. 4 were soapstone. The 5th was cut rock crystal, fitted with a handle of cast gold. They held charred bone and ash, and they held roughly 1,800 small objects packed in around the bone. The list of those objects is the part people forget. Gold leaf discs stamped with Buddhist symbols, granulated gold ornaments, silver stars, pearls, some fused together in clusters of 2, 3, and 4, coral, shell, beads drilled from amethyst, topaz, garnet, rock crystal, and carnelian. In early Indian Buddhism, there was no clean line between a gem offering and a bone fragment. Both were called sarira. The jewels were not decoration. They were part of the body. One of the soapstone caskets carried an inscription, 37 characters cut into the lid and around the shoulder in Brahmi script, in a regional Prakrit. It was that inscription, not the gold, that made the find explosive. Within months, the reading was in print. In the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Auguste Barth translated it as a gift of the brothers of Sukirti, together with their sisters, their sons, and their wives, containing the relics of the Blessed Buddha of the Shakyas. Georg Bühler read it the same way. So did Smith. So did William Hoey and T.W. Rhys Davids. If that reading was right, Peppé had found the Shakya share. The Mahaparinibbana Sutta records that after the cremation at Kushinagad, around 480 BCE, 8 regional powers argued over the remains. A Brahmin named Dona divided the bone and ash into 8 equal portions. The Shakyas of Kapilavastu, the Buddha's own clan, took 1 share home and raised a mound over it. Peppé's mound sat in exactly the country where that clan had lived. But the translation did not hold unchallenged for long. Between 1905 and 1907, the epigraphist John Faithful Fleet and the Indologist Sylvain Lévy read the same 37 characters and got a different sentence. In their version, the relics were not the Buddhas at all. They belonged to the Shakyas themselves, the kinsmen of the Buddha, who were slaughtered when King Viradaka of Kosala destroyed Kapilavastu. Same stone, same letters, two completely different bodies in the jar. And then the whole find fell under a shadow that had nothing to do with grammar. His name was Alois Anton Führer, a German Indologist, assistant archaeological surveyor for the Archaeological Survey of India, and the man credited with the Lumbini Pillar in 1896. He came to Piprahwa in February 1898 at Peppé's invitation. That same year, Vincent Smith went through Führer's field notes. What Smith found was systematic fraud. Invented Ashokan inscriptions from surveys in Burma and Sanchi. Reports describing inscribed Shakyan caskets at Sagadwa that did not exist. A trade in fake Buddha relics run with a Burmese monk. Confronted, Führer admitted his published work on the Nepalese Tadai was false. On the 22nd of September 1898, the government seized his office papers. He was stripped of his ASI posts and forced to resign. His monograph on the birthplace of the Buddha was withdrawn from circulation. The question wrote itself. If Führer forged inscriptions for a living, and Führer stood a Piprahwa in 1898, was the Piprahwa inscription his work too? That suspicion outlived everyone involved. Heinrich Lüders raised doubts in 1912. The British Museum curator Michael Willis raised them again in 2012. A separate line of argument, advanced in revisionist essays and self-published work, proposed that Führer, Peppé, Smith, and Hoey had colluded to manufacture a find that would win funding for the ASI and favor from the Court of Siam. That version rests on a single speculative framework and no primary documentation. Three things stand against it. The correspondence between Peppé, Smith, and the Royal Asiatic Society shows the inscription was already transcribed, sketched, and circulating before Führer reached Piprahwa in February 1898. He arrived roughly 6 weeks after the coffer was opened. The philology was beyond him. Later examination showed Führer lacked the competence to invent late Mauryan Prakrit forms. The inscription uses the word nidana in a precise technical sense that linguists did not decode for another century. And the physical evidence is simply unforgeable. A 3/4-ton block of sandstone sat 18 feet down inside an undisturbed solid brick core that took weeks of labor to breach. You cannot plant that. Then the relics scattered. Under colonial antiquity policy, the British Crown would not hold the human remains of a major Eastern religion in a museum. In 1899, the bone and ash were offered to King Chulalongkorn of Siam. He accepted and shared portions with Buddhist representatives from Ceylon, Burma, and Japan. The royal share was enshrined on the Golden Mount at Wat Saket in Bangkok. The sandstone coffer, the inscribed casket, the crystal vase, and the bulk of the gems went to the Indian Museum in Kolkata. Peppé was permitted to keep a small share of duplicate beads and gems, which stayed in his family for 4 generations. For 70 years, the question of what lay under the coffer went unasked. Between 1971 and 1973, the Archaeological Survey of India returned. K.M. Srivastava dug beneath the level where Peppé had stopped. At 19.7 feet below the coffer, he found 2 brick chambers, north and south. Inside were 2 more soapstone caskets, matching the uninscribed ones from 1898, 4 broken redware dishes, and 22 fragments of charred bone. The stupa had been built twice. An earlier mud brick structure held the first deposit. Around 240 to 200 BCE, Mordian builders opened it, lifted part of the relics into a new sandstone coffer, cut the inscription, and sealed it under a fired brick dome. Then they left the deeper chambers untouched. Srivastava also dug at Ganwaria, a mound about 1.5 kilometers away. There he found 41 terracotta ceilings from the Kushan period. Their Brahmi legends named the monastic order of Kapilavastu. That settled the map. Piprahwa was Kapilavastu. The inscription was settled last. The philologist Harry Falk re-examined it at the India Museum in Kolkata and showed that midana does not mean receptacle. It means the act of enshrinement itself. His reading names the enshrinement of the corporeal remnants of the Buddha of the Shakyas, to the credit of the Shakya brothers with their sisters, sons, and wives. He dated the letter forms to 240 to 200 BCE. Richard Solomon reached the same conclusion. Peppé had been right. It only took 115 years. The bones of the Buddha now rest in 4 countries.